sound recordist. My job is to record, have the opportunity to look at the arc of a character.
First thing to understand is what in a scene in terms of its sonic world.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Dave FM. I'm your host, David Moylan. We are broadcasting out of Shepparton, Victoria, Australia. Our aim here is to get a better understanding of the ins and outs of the Australian film industry. We're talking to people in the industry and getting a better insight into the do's and don'ts, from pre-production through to post-production and beyond. This is Dave FM. Our guest today is Ron Brown, Australian producer and director of TV series and films. He is an editor and a cinema photographer. He is a member of OZflix, your one-stop shop to view new Australian films and old. He is also a member of the Australian Film Future Foundation, which we'll be talking about throughout the program. Ron Brown, thank you very much for joining us today here on Dave FM.
My pleasure, David.
Could you just start with giving our listeners a bit of background knowledge of who you are and what you're about?
Yeah, sure. Look, I've been a film producer, an independent film producer in Australia for about 44 years. And prior to that, basically, I entered pretty much straight after university. I was a student, so it's been my lifelong career. Most of the work I've done in that time is as an independent filmmaker. So I started out doing contracted work, everything from corporate videos, music videos, TV episodes, and in more recent years, in the last about 12 or 13 years, I've moved into feature film productions as well. So we now produce feature films, and of course, as well as that, I'm also involved with the OZflix project.
They're fantastic, and that's the place to go to view Australian film content. And what's your production company?
Okay, so basically, for the longest time, I've operated a company called Forte Communications, and that's been our sort of production company for corporates and music videos and TV stuff. When we make feature films, each feature film has its own particular production company. So No Two Snowflakes Proprietary Limited, and Sweet for Fleur Proprietary Limited, and Let Me Not Proprietary Limited, because those films are made under a structure where they need their own production company for each film as we go, yeah.
Of course. And where would somebody likely to view those films?
So the first film that we made, the first feature film we made, which was finally released in 2006, which we shot in 2004, that's called Let Me Not, and that stars Roger Corser and the late Bud Tingwell. And that film, which is a romantic drama, that was screened on the 9 network. It was actually filmed in a sort of a very, I would say, a very simple portable video format. It wasn't a high resolution format, but we managed to sell it to Channel 9, and now that contract has finished. They've shown it about 5 times over 5 years. So you can watch Let Me Not now on OZflix. So just go to ozflix.tv and you can look at Let Me Not. The other 2 feature films which I've produced myself and co-directed in the last 8 or 9 years have been Sweet for Fleur and No Two Snowflakes. They are actually just about to be released this year on OZflix. So what, in terms of the history, my personal history, we've done is we really built OZflix. I built it. I was kind of motivated to build it because I wasn't finding enough opportunities to get my own films out in front of audiences. Once they come off a cinema screen or once they come off TV, these days it's very, very hard for people to get access to Australian films. And I thought, well, if they're not going to be available anywhere else, I'll start a streaming platform. But it's kind of grown, and it's really grown, actually. We started off with 178 films just under a year ago, and we've now got over 350 films on there. And I think by the end of this year, we'll be somewhere around 700 films, and by the middle of next year, towards the end of next year, we'll have 1,000 Australian films. So just about any film you can think of, I reckon we'll be there within the next 1 to 2 years.
Wow, that's fantastic. So in content, there would be everything from your low-budget films to your high-budget films?
We've got films like mine, like Let Me Not, which was a low-budget film, but made to, what I would call a TV movie sort of quality. But we've got films all the way up to Mad Max Fury Road, $150, $170 million film, yeah. So anything Australian is possible for us to stream, and all the filmmakers, the producers, the distributors, they're all coming on board now and offering us their films, and it's just a question of how quickly we can get them up there. We are adding about 10 or 12 new films every fortnight onto that service. So, as I say, within 2 years we'll have 1,000 films up there, and it'll be just about every film. I mean, we've got a lot of the classic Australian films on there now. We've got all the Mad Max films going right back. We've got, Muriel's Wedding and The Castle and, all that sort of stuff. But we've got lots and lots of independent films as well that you can't see anywhere else. So the big films you can see on other places, but the independent films and the lost classics, I call them, you only see those on OZflix, because none of the other streaming platforms will take them on. They just are too specialised for them.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, it's a good thing OZflix are there to present those films. Now, you're also the co-founder of Australian Film Future Foundation. Could you give us a bit of an insight into your involvement with that?
When Alan Finney, my business partner, and I, Alan is a former a film producer and also a distribution executive as well, and he did all the marketing and publicity around the films like Mad Max and The Castle and Muriel's Wedding and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert and films like that. But when he and I got our heads together to talk about building OZflix, one of the things we realised is there's about 1,000 Australian films that we could get our hands on to put on OZflix, but there was another 1,000 films which are just not available to be streamed. So you might say they're sort of lost, but they're not really lost. What it is, they're just not in digital files for streaming. So they're still film prints, they're videotape master copies, they're still, in people's drawers, under their beds, in their mum's garage. So in order to get those films onto OZflix, we needed to restore those films and preserve them and to digitise them. And the way that we decided to do that was fairest and best for everybody, was to create a film foundation, and that's called the Australian Film Future Foundation. And that's a non-for-profit organisation that is going to give grants to filmmakers to restore their films. So a lot of the classic films that are hidden away in closets, we're going to get them out. We're going to turn them into digital streaming files, and we're going to put them up on OZflix. So ultimately, and it may take 5 or 10 years, Dave, but ultimately the idea is there'll be another 1,000 lost films which we will bring back from the old vaults and so on, and get them up onto the streaming platform, and they'll be there forever after that.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do, to preserve those films. It'd take a lot of manpower and hours and even money to make that all happen. How does that come about?
Well, we basically we've just started now this year, because last year we had to get the tax department to give us a tax deductible status for donations, and we finally got that very late last year, 2017. So this year we're going to start asking people to donate to the foundation, and that money will be used to restore the film. So the donations, we're trying to raise $10 million But the way that we're doing it is we're not really asking mums and dads to make donations. We're really asking to approach philanthropic trusts. So in other words, rich people who leave money to trusts, private donors, often very rich people again, and corporations, companies that make profit and want tax deduction for some of that money. They can make a tax deductible donation to the foundation, and then we'll use that money to restore the films and put them up there.
Yeah, marvellous effort. And there's so many films that aren't digitally available, and would be great to see some of them, and dust the cobwebs off and restore them back to a modest form, and digitise them to for the future audience.
Yeah, well, once they're in the cloud, Dave, they pretty much there forever, because it's a very a sad thing for me that the National Film and Sound Archive in Canberra have got thousands and thousands of films locked in a vault, but you can't really see them. And I'm glad somebody is preserving them. I'm glad they are down there and in Canberra in a safe place. But you and I couldn't see one of those unless we drove down to Canberra. We have to put in a request. We'd be given a date and a time, and then we could drive down to Canberra or fly down to Canberra, whatever, and sit in the theatre there and watch the film. But that's just not a practical thing for most people. Most people want to just be able to go to their computer or their smart TV and just be able to dial it up and watch it.
Absolutely, yeah. I can't see many of us going to that extent unless it was something needed for a project or whatever. To view that material. So what have you got in store or in the works for the future?
Well, what's coming up is very exciting, because in the same way that Netflix and Stan and a number of others started out streaming the old films and then they got into making their own films, OZflix is doing that this year as well. So we've actually got about 4 or 5 films right now that we'll be making this year, and that we'll be putting on OZflix when they're finished later in the year or early next year. So be on the lookout for OZflix Originals. We'll be on our Facebook page, which is just facebook.com/OZflix TV. On that Facebook page, we'll be making announcements about the original films that we're going to be making. And if you're a subscriber to OZflix, if you watch OZflix now, and it's free to subscribe, by the way, it doesn't cost anything to subscribe to OZflix.
Yeah.
If you go to OZflix TV and subscribe, then you will be able to be on our mailing list to hear about the original films that we're going to make that you won't be able to see anywhere else. These will be brand new Australian movies that will only be available on OZflix later in the year.
That's fantastic. Because there's no real platform for a lot of filmmakers in Australia to present their films. They and certainly for myself, I've made several films that don't get noticed or seen by an audience. So that would be invaluable, I would think, to many Australian filmmakers.
Well, yeah, the trouble is that, when you look at the economics of it, it's very, very difficult for independent Australian films to get a cinema screen, and it's also very difficult to get DVD releases, because basically that is all controlled by the big Hollywood studios. So there are a few independent Australian films that kind of do get a run. If you think about films like Oddball or The Dressmaker or Last Cab to Darwin, a few of those. But the most of the Australian films that do get on in the cinema, like Mad Max Fury Road or The Great Gatsby, or, some of the, I suppose you could say, probably, Baz Luhrmann's films, George Miller's films, and so on. Those films, they're made by big Hollywood studios. They might be made by Australians and with Australians, but they're not independent films. They're studio films, and they get into the studio system, and therefore they get into cinemas. and they get out on DVD and Blu-ray. But the independent films, the films that people make just with their own blood, sweat and tears, it's very, very hard to get on in the cinema and very hard to get out on DVD and very hard to find. So OZflix is very much, we've got the big stuff. I mean, we have all the big films, but we've also got all the independent films that people are, struggling to make and to get an audience.
Yep. There'd be so many student filmmakers and people of all sorts that are trying to get their films out to get an audience, and that would be incredible opportunity for a lot of people.
Yeah, so we're going to start, this year we'll do 4 or 5, and as we go along, hopefully we can build that up and do more.
Fantastic. Now, Ron, could you give us some information for our viewers where they could go to donate to the Australian Film Future Foundation?
Yep. So the Australian Film Future Foundation website is just, it's at AUSFILM Foundation.com. So OzFilm Foundation, no, not .com, I'm sorry, .org. OzFilmFoundation.org, O-R-G. And the OzFilm Foundation, the Australian Film Foundation, has also got a Facebook page, and obviously if you are interested in supporting that, the best thing to do would be to go to either the Facebook page or the website. You can read a lot of information there about what work we're doing and who our supporters are and how we're going about, supporting filmmakers with films to be restored. If you just want to watch OZflix TV, you can just go to ozflix.tv. That's on the internet. Register there for free, and you can scroll through. There's 350 films on there, and you just pay per view for any one film that you want to watch. It's only a few dollars. It's very, very cheap to watch films on there, and you don't have to, as I said, pay anything to subscribe or register. It's a free to go in. And we've also got, not only have you got the films to rent, but we make a lot of free shows about Australian films, about Australian cinema that you can watch for free on there. So there's a lot of shows, reviews, behind the scene, making of, all that sort of stuff is a lot of that on there, which is completely free to watch. So people can go and have a look at ozflix.tv, don't even have to spend $1 to start to have a look around and to watch some content.
Fantastic, Ron. What's not to like about that? There's so much there for everyone, and especially when it's free. But fantastic, Ron. We're pretty much out of time, but I want to thank you very much for joining us here at Dave FM, and please continue your efforts in your pursuits in getting independent filmmakers onto the screen and viewed by the general public.
Terrific, thanks, Dave, and do keep your podcast going too. Good on you.
Thank you very much, Ron, and all the best.
Mate. Thanks. Good on you. Cheers. Bye.
So if you'd like to make a donation to the Australian Film Future Foundation, you can find it on Facebook, and as always at ozfilmfoundation.org, and donate to this very worthy cause of preserving old films for future generations. I'm your host, David Moylan, and thank you for joining us here on Dave FM. We'll see you next time.